Hey everybody, I am Bill and welcome to Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. This is the default Cessna 172. This is the steam gauge one, not the G1000 plane. It's very similar to the plane that I fly in the real world. I am a real world private pilot working on my instrument rating, and I thought this would be a perfect place to start with this sim. It's not really a tutorial, but I wanted to walk through the startup procedure and maybe fly a pattern or two in this plane as kind of a semi-tutorial, but also a review to just see where we're at 1 week into the launch of this simulator. If you're new to flight simulation or aviation in general, welcome. Hopefully you do find this helpful. There's a couple of things that we do in the real world that you don't really do in the sim world, so I'll kind of touch on some of those things just to give you an idea what you think about when you're about to fly a plane in real life versus in the sim. So this is the default plane. I still haven't sorted out all of the views yet, so I'm not exactly going to be smooth on the controls here for the camera views, but this is the default plane. It looks really good, and we're gonna see how close to reality it is from a startup standpoint. The couple flights that I've done already in this plane, there is one key thing that if you don't realize it, you won't be able to start it. So we will just start there. We'll go inside the plane here, and this is very, very similar to the plane that I fly in the real world. So this should be a lot of fun to go through. Cessna 172 is a very, very simple plane, and even though we use checklists for everything, it's so simple that you can eventually get to a point where you're doing all the checklist items and then consulting the checklist once you've actually completed those items to make sure you've done it. This is what the checklist looks like for the plane. So this is the actual checklist. This is a digital version of it, and it's got all of the procedures for startup. So you would go through each one of these. Throttle, make sure it's a 1/4 inch open, mixture, idle cut off, propeller area clear, master switch on, beacon on, all that stuff. So we're not going to use this, but just know that this is out there. You can go and search for Cessna 172 checklist, and you'll get something that looks like this. And you can, before engine starting, you've got even just the whole real world procedures. And as deep as flight sims are, they will utilize a real world checklist. Some of the stuff is not operable in this flight sim in particular, but most things in this 172 in terms of starting it will be accurate here. Okay, so there's something that's called door to floor, floor to door. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, but it's an easy way to go through a flow to make sure you've checked everything and done everything correctly. So we're going to go first on the door to floor, floor to door. No, I had it right, door to floor. So we're going to start from the left and just make sure everything is off. So the mags are off, master switch is off. All of these switches, it's a fuel pump, and then all the lights, pitot heat, those are all off. Avionics switch is off. Throttle is pulled all the way out. Mixture is pulled all the way out. And then we go down here. We can make sure that the trim is set. I have it bound to the hat switch on my flight stick. So that's at takeoff right there. And then we have this fuel cutoff valve, and we've got the fuel selector. This is what got me, because in most sims, the fuel shutoff valve is actually defaulted as in. In the plane as well, in real life, we never pull that out unless there's an emergency and we're trying to shut fuel off from getting to the engine. So this is something that you just check to make sure is in, but for some reason it defaults to out in this sim. So on our other direction, as we start to set everything to start the plane, the floor to door check, we'll actually turn that off. Or turn that on, excuse me. So instead of having, just to make sure that this isn't in like the left or right switch, when you refuel a 172, you actually want the fuel selector switch to be on either the left or right tank to prevent cross-feeding as the fuel tanks on each wing are being filled. So in the real world, when we shut the plane down, we do switch it to one of the tanks. So you do have to make sure that that is in both. We're going to put the fuel cutoff valve in, and it's conveniently hidden behind this cord for the microphone here. So that is a very easy thing to miss. And then we're going to have the mixture. We're going to push that mixture in right now, and then we're going to crack the throttle about 1/4 inch. We're going to come over here, and we're going to make sure the avionics is off. We're going to turn on the beacon, and then we're going to turn the master switches on there. The beacon comes on whenever you're about to start an airplane, and that just lets everybody know around you that the plane is on, and that's the little flashing red light on the tail of the plane. So that is on. That tells everybody that we're about to start the plane. Then we would yell out the window, clear prop. Make sure that these homeboys in the high vis vests are paying attention, which they're clearly not. Okay, it's only been a week since this came out, so it's bound to be some bugs. So then once we have the power on, we're gonna hit this fuel pump switch for about 3 seconds, and we're hopefully gonna see some fuel flow here, and this is gonna prime the engine because it is a fuel injected engine. So 1, 2, 3. You can see, or maybe you can or can't, it just barely moved here. The real plane would actually kind of build pressure on that fuel flow gauge right there. That's the smaller of the 4 gauges in the upper right there. So that is now primed, so we can take the mixture out. And this is a little bit tricky because my usual setup is not working right now. I have a Cytec panel, so I'm able to actually do both of these things at the same time. But we're gonna start with the mixture in. Usually you'd start it with the key here with the mags with the mixture out, and as soon as it catches, then we would put the mixture in, and the engine would start. So with the throttle cracked a little bit, you can see it moving there about 1/4 inch. We're gonna push this in and switch over to left, right, both, and then hold this down and make sure the brake is set. Part of the checklist, which it usually is set before I start doing all that stuff, but I didn't use the checklist and forgot about it. And we'll crank it right now. 1, 2, and it starts right up. So once it starts, then you're going to adjust the mixture control so we're not using a lot of gas while while we're just on the ground. And then we're going to want the RPM, so we're going to move the throttle back until we're showing about 1,000 RPM. And that's going to be where the engine's going to be for warm up. So right now we're looking at the temperature and the pressure. We have oil pressure and the temps are coming up. It looks like it was already the oil temperature, there was already some in there, which is a little bit odd. Then we're going to turn on the taxi light. We can turn on taxi and landing light. Nav light we don't need because it's not nighttime out. If it was dark, we would put the nav lights on before we actually started the engine up. Then we're going to turn on the avionics now that the engine has started. So the avionics are coming on. We're not going to mess with any radio calls. We're not going to mess with any of the avionics or radios. We would normally have the CTAF up so we can announce our position to our fellow aviators at French Valley here, but we're not going to do that. Also, I know that the field elevation here is 1300, so instead of getting what the actual altimeter setting is, I can just move it to what the field elevation is, which you can also do if you go into a program like SkyVector. This is ForeFlight, so I have actually the airport information up here, and you can see that it's 1350 is the field elevation. This is set for live weather, so if I go into weather here and look at the altimeter setting, which is 2982, if I put 2982 here in the altimeter, it's going to be about what the correct elevation is. So there's 2982, and that is about the right elevation. So that looks good. Okay, once we have the engine started and the oil temperature looks good, And I'm taking this from a kind of a more casual, like, how does this thing start up? How do you taxi? How do you fly a pattern? Not actually going through every single step that you would normally do in real life. But this should, if you're new to this, this should get you started. We're gonna get the parking brake coming off here, and as we keep warming the engine up, we're gonna taxi out to the runway here. Away from that bus. And using real world information in these flight sims will work. Websites like SkyVector are super valuable when you're learning this kind of stuff. You can see what the airport diagrams look like, so you know where to taxi, what the runways are, where you should go, what the frequencies are. A lot of great information available for free. Again, skyvector.com is a great resource. What I'm using here is an app called ForeFlight, and that has all that same information just available when we fly. I bring this with me in the real plane, and it's got all the information that something like SkyVector would have, along with GPS data, so I can actually track myself along the chart. Okay. And again, I'm assuming that you can at least, like, you have either rudder pedals or you've got controls bound here, so you know what the brakes are and all that stuff. But all right, so as we're holding short here on the runway, for the runway, I should say, this is runway 18 at French Valley, and we're lined up here. Normally, you would go into the run-up area, which is that dotted line there, surrounded by those blue lights, which shouldn't be there. But I'm going to check to make sure that all my control surfaces are working as they should. So I'm going to go in this view. So there's the left aileron going up and down there. Right ailerons going up and down there. Let's look at the elevator in the back. That should be going up and down. There's up, it's down. That looks good. And we can also check the flaps here, make sure that those go all the way down. There's first notch, second notch, third notch. Okay, so those are all good. And then the other thing we do, and this is kind of all part of what's called a run-up, and this is just checking to make sure that the plane is healthy and working correctly before we go take off. Now that we've got some oil temperature, I would increase the mixture a little bit. You don't have to go all the way. And then we're going to get the RPMs up to about 1600, and then check the mags over here with the key. So we're going to go check it to the left. Whoop, that turned it off. There's a left, so we'll have a drop in RPM. Now let's go to both. And that's another drop. Good. So you have left, right, and both. And we're just checking to make sure that there's a drop in each one. We'll not bore you with the reasons for that. Okay, so the engine's good, the controls are good, everything looks good, we're ready to go. So we have a little thing to help us before we take off to turn everything on that needs to be on. We have a transponder right here, which we haven't off. So before we take off, we're going to make sure that this is on. We're going to put in 1200, which is a VFR squawk beacon code, and we're going to make sure it's on alt mode. That just means that that's on. So that is what we would call our camera. So we have this flow where we go lights. So the strobe is coming on. We don't need nav because it's not at night. Camera, transponder is on. And action, we push the mixture all the way in. And the pattern altitude is 1,000 feet above the field elevation at this airport. So if the field elevation is 1,300, the pattern altitude is 2,300, and they don't want you turning until you're at that pattern altitude. So now we're on runway 18. We would announce that we're departing for left closed traffic here. So far, the plane is actually looking, feeling, and acting pretty close to the real thing, which is nice. I haven't actually had the time to to do this in this plane, which is why I wanted to do kind of a walkthrough of this. The first 2 videos in this sim, got a lot of comments and a lot of interaction from people that are new to aviation. So I figured that it would be hopefully useful for those of you that are new to this and want to get a little bit of a taste of how you would handle a plane in real life and how to get this thing going. So I'm going up to 2300. The climb performance is really bad right now, so that's a little bit off. It's only 60 knots. So I'm looking at this gauge right here, upper left, the airspeed. It's real world weather, so it's probably just really hot. I didn't actually check the temperature before I took off. But the higher temperatures will affect the climb performance, and the engine will run hot, and you'll just decrease performance. And this is definitely taking longer for us to climb out than it normally would. Scenery looks fantastic though, and looks just like the real thing. I'm based out of John Wayne Airport, which is just on the other side of the mountains there to the right in Orange County. Okay, so now we're going to turn what is called a crosswind. So this is a left pattern, and this is a left crosswind. And now that we're at our pattern altitude, we can let the nose come down. We don't want to go higher than 2300, and we don't want to go lower than 2300. You want to be just at that pattern altitude. God, that looks really good. And I'm pulling the power back because we're just staying in the pattern. We don't need to go that fast. Okay, so now we're going to turn left downwind, and this is what would be like a parallel leg around the or to the runway, and you fly. Well, you'll see. So we're going to get lined up parallel to the actual runway. Let's see, that view does not help actually. Yeah, so there's the runway, and you can see that we're parallel, flying in the opposite direction right now, a little bit high above pattern altitude, but this is about where I would be in the real world flying a pattern here. This might be a tiny bit far out from where I would normally be, but not by too much. That climb performance made this shape a little bit different. So now we've sped up a little bit. You can see our airspeed is now it's about 100 knots. So I'm going to pull the power back a little bit more. And once I'm at beam, which means directly perpendicular to the numbers or the end of the runway, I am going to put in the first notch of flaps. So there's a beam, the numbers right there, and I'm going to put in the first notch of flaps and start descending. And I mean, there are a bunch of ways to explain this, and I don't want to fly into that cloud either. But some of it is just feel at some point. So now I'm going to turn on to left base and put in another notch of flaps as soon as the speed gets below 80 knots. I'm going to have to pull power back a little bit more. And this is my first time flying a pattern in this plane in the sim here. So I'm actually, which is why not really a tutorial or a review. It's kind of a little bit of both because I'm not exactly sure how this thing's going to handle this. So there's the second notch of flaps now that we're underneath the flap speed, which is 85 knots roughly. And you can see it from that white arc there. And now we're going to turn on to final. Again, not announcing anything. And we're going to put in the third notch of flaps, add a little power because I don't want to go too slow. And we're going to get those 4 white lights. I want 2 white and 2 red, and that's going to tell me that I'm on the glide slope. Being a little bit high is okay. You just don't want to get too low. So if it had 3 red or 4 red, that's too low. We can make up height, but you don't want to get too low. Because if the engine were to quit and you're too low, you'll be in trouble. Now we're over the numbers. I'm just going to pull it idle and see what this thing does. And it's really touchy on the elevator. But it's slowing down actually pretty nice. And there is touchdown. I have to say I am pleasantly surprised at how that felt. Okay, let's go full power and let's get this thing back in the air. These are called touch and goes, and I can do this all day long. And if you click on the link below to my Twitch channel, there will probably be a stream where I do this all day long and just fly in the pattern in this simulator because I love it. It seemed like such a weird thing when I first got into flying. You know, I never got why people would go beat the pattern up, as they say, like just go fly around the pattern for an hour and that's it. That's all you did when you can go someplace. And now, having done it, I get it because it is so much fun and such a challenge to, you know, make your landings better and better. It's addicting. And even in the sim, because part of aviation is repetition and practicing and learning it. You can't just jump into a new plane for the first time and expect to know how it handles immediately. And that's something that a lot of casual flight simmers or people that are just getting into it have trouble with because it's so tempting to want to load up in a 747 and, you know, go do a cool flight or something when you don't know how the plane reacts. And the real pilots are in, you know, full motion simulators for thousands of hours and studying, you know, all before they jump in the real plane. And it can be frustrating when you think you should just be able to jump in a plane like you would jump in a car in Forza and do a couple laps. But this stuff is different. It is different, and part of what's interesting and intriguing to me about this new simulator is the apparent focus on also the casual gamer. And initially, it has not felt great for the hardcore sim crowd. There's a little bit too much attention paid, in our opinion, on how it controls with a controller, easy modes, challenges, that kind of stuff, where, you know, if you come from P3D, X-Plane, or even FSX, it was a lot more of a hardcore simulation, where the core simulator was based on the systems of the plane, and anything that was additional was done by third-party developers later on. But the actual core simulator is the physics engine that's made for creating airplanes and weather add-ons and airports and all that stuff. So, okay, I'm going to try something. This is called a short approach. And basically, as soon as I get a beam of numbers like we did before, instead of doing that nice progressive pattern, I'm going to pull the power all the way out, and I'm going to pitch the nose up to slow it down a little bit. As soon as we get under 80 knots, 85 knots, I'm going to get all the flaps in. And this is where simulators get kind of tricky when you can't see where you're going, and you also don't know what the controls are. So basically, I'm going to try to get the plane down to the numbers as quickly as possible. I did put in full flaps here, which in real life you probably wouldn't do if you had an actual engine out, because you don't want to lose that drag. But this is pretty nice. I mean, we're descending really quick. The plane is not accelerating too much. Now we're going to let that rudder out, and right on the 1,000-footers, kind of, a little bit. It's really sensitive on the elevator. Well, I'm way off center line there. So that's probably a sensitivity setting somewhere. This is the first time I've done this in the sim, and part of what is cool about flight simulators, my dad hates computer games. He's always hated them. But what's cool is because he was a pilot, he could load up in this, and just by knowing what the controls are, like where the controls are manipulated by using the mouse or with a button on the keyboard or whatever, he could manage this plane. And that's kind of true for a pilot, a real world pilot that's familiar with whatever you're flying in the simulator. So you don't have to be a gamer. You don't have to be into computers to be able to do this if you know the real world procedures, which is so awesome and validating and it validates flight simulators as a way to learn. I used X-Plane 11 to get my private license. I soloed quickly. I did my cross-country flight quickly, all because I was able to practice the real-world procedures. And I know some of you are probably looking at my airspeed right now, going like, "Dude, you're about to stall." And I do recognize that. I am just imagining how hot it is right now. It's got to be 100 degrees. It's saying 78 degrees outside. That can't be right. There's no way it's 70. But yeah, that climb out speed is a little weird. Everything is full forward. Wonder what that truck going back and forth is doing. So this is just a default airport as well. I picked it because it's got a long runway. I'm familiar with the pattern, and it looks pretty. A lot of the default premium airports are bigger airports or at high altitude, which makes this not very fun. So I'm gonna try that again and have a little bit nicer of a landing. It may be a more realistic engine out landing. So if the engine was out right now, I'm gonna put the first notch of flaps in. That increases drag, but also increases lift. So if I don't have any power from the engine, I want to still maintain lift because I'm not going to be going any faster, but I also don't want to increase drag because I can't go any faster. And you can have one or the other. Either increased lift or increased drag. I should say, no, you can only have both. You can't have one or the other. You can't have lower drag and increased lift, or more lift and less drag. Okay. Yeah, that elevator is really sensitive. I just put in that third notch of flaps and it ballooned up. And you can see it's kind of bucking up and down like that. It would not be that sensitive. Okay, so let's get the flaps coming up. That's the drone camera, which I don't know why it's stuck so close to the plane. But my God, this simulator is so pretty, and it's going to continue to get better. But I have to say that I am pleasantly surprised at how this plane is handling right now. It looks great. It sounds great. There's a few performance things that I think could be tweaked in some settings, like the control sensitivity. Overall, though, it feels much better than some of the bigger planes and jets that I've tried out so far. This climb out performance is a little bit... Yeah, see, look, we're about to stall there. It's a little bit weird that it's going so slow. But that's probably something that can be updated as well. Yeah, the minute I start to climb, pitch the nose up, and it could be just that it looks like the pitch is not as high as it really is. So you want to keep the nose down and make sure that you're climbing at an appropriate speed, which is about 70 knots, 70 to 80 knots climbing out here. And it's been hot out this way, so I would probably climb out even a little bit faster, like you know, between 75 and 80 probably, just so the plane didn't, the engine didn't cook itself. All right, now we'll make this one a full stop here. Oh, so we're not at our pattern altitude yet. Getting lazy in the pattern. All right. 2,300. And per the information in this airport, they want you to keep climbing to pattern altitude before you make that turn, but that makes it much longer. That's for noise abatement, which we don't really care what the neighbors think because we're in a simulator. All right, so we're past to beam the numbers there, so let's get the first notch of flaps coming in. We're going to let it descend. Kind of use this road that we're about to cross as my base turn. So we'll turn there, and the speed has come down below that safe to extend the flap speed for that second notch. So get the second notch in there, and we can take a peek at where our runway is. This is a nice tight pattern. You don't want to fly the pattern too big because, again, if you have an engine failure, you don't want to be too far from the runway. You want to, ideally, in an ideal world, be able to make the runway if you had a engine out at any point, which is something that which you don't consider in a flight simulator, and for the most part, most of us that do use flight simulators still like to fly the way we would the real plane in a lot of respects, and that is one of them. Flying a close, tight pattern is a challenge to basically see how tight you can safely fly the pattern, and in the simulator that's kind of fun because it just from a being able to land perspective, it's much easier to, you know, have a big wide pattern, but it doesn't do you any good. So I went idle basically over before that road, and it's gonna run out of energy right at the right time here. No stall horn though. Oh, came on really late. But that was actually a pretty decent feeling landing, I have to say. And this is kind of a weird. This is a weird taxiway. If you can make it, it's a reverse high speed, so you can get it stopped in time and make that in a plane like this. Now we're going to get the flaps coming up as soon as we're off the runway. And then we're also going to not be animals and leave the strobes on. So these are just like, I mean, they're strobes. They're flashy blinking lights. And we're going to be bothering a lot of people on the ground if you have those on, because they are blinding. I mean, they're meant to be able to spot an aircraft from miles away in the air moving at high rates of speed. So you don't want that flashing in the high-vis vest guy's eyes. They're still just hanging out here. Nice little union break. So there is a little walkthrough review of flying a pattern in the default 172 in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. Better than I thought it was going to be. Still has some deficiencies in nothing that I can put my finger on. There's just some sensitivity, speed, power numbers just don't seem to be quite on. But I have a feeling that in the next few weeks and months, there's going to be a number of improvements and updates to the flight characteristics, flight models, and maybe even settings that you can do yourself. So this is by no means an indication of what this simulator will be like in the months to come, but it's a pretty good starting point. And when it looks this good, any improvement that you can make to the way the plane feels is going to be a total bonus, because my God, this is a pretty simulator. All right, so the first thing you want to do when you're shutting it down is turn the avionics off. If you turn everything off before you shut that down, think of it like pulling the plug on your computer, on your desktop before shutting it down properly. It'll freak it out. So we'll turn the avionics off. We'll turn off the lights, and then pull the mixture. Engine stops. We'll turn off the beacon and the master switch, turn off the mags, and then we can do our normal door to floor check. So mags are off, master's off, light switches are all off, avionics are off, throttle is out, mixture is out. We're going to leave the cutoff in because what the heck, and then we're going to move that to left or right, doesn't matter, so we can get some fuel in there. Okay. Fuel, that would actually not read anything with the batteries turned off. Yeah, so that's a little bit weird. There's some quirky things to the avionics in here. A lot of stuff doesn't work, but this is the simplest plane. So higher percentage of things, systems in the plane do actually kind of work. The GPS and avionics, that, however, is really not there. So it's going to be VFR flying for a while. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this was helpful in any way. I do stream. This is one of the first flight sim YouTube only videos I've done in a very long time, so it's kind of awkward for me. I'm used to having people to chat with and interact with while I fly, but it was kind of a nice little break. The link below will send you to my Twitch page, and you can watch, hang out, ask questions on some longer flights. That's really where I got started, learning everything that I needed to know as a student pilot, and learning the sim. The interaction, the live interaction, is really nice, and then you've got a bunch of other people in the chat as well that can help answer questions if the streamer can't, or is busy trying to do something. The other link that's in the description is the Discord server. It's a great community that has grown from the combination of real-world flying and videos and content that I do and the flight sim stuff. So if you're interested in flight simulation but also want to see how it relates to the real-world stuff, or think you might want to look into what it takes to be a real-world pilot, the Discord server is an unbelievable resource. We have a ton of CFIs, airline pilots, student pilots, just any matter of aviation industry member is in that Discord server. So I would love to have you check it out and see if it's something you'd want to pursue. So thank you guys very much. Let me know in the comment section if you have any questions. This was a very rough video from a real world flying perspective. I did probably 24 things incorrectly, but that just shows you how involved aviation can be. It's still very fun. I don't mean that to scare you, but there's a lot of things, there's a lot of stuff to learn, and if you enjoy learning, it's very rewarding to learn how to do stuff the right way, because if you can do it correctly in the sim and you jump in a real plane, you will be blown away by how accurate it can actually be. So again, thank you guys for watching, and hopefully we'll see you around in some future videos. See ya!